This meeting is, I am going to say, got it. And that's it.
And I can share screen and we should be good to go.
Okay.
Good. And you can see the shared screen?
Yeah. Awesome.
Okay.
Thank
good.
you. Thank you.
Okay. Right. Whoops.
So just saying next and previous would work.
Is it still showing the slides?
Yep, it's still showing.
Yeah.
Okay, got it. Great. We are now ready to go.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So again, thank you guys for coming. And I'll just jump in. Trauma resolution, dealing with trauma. And this started with really answering the question, what if we could solve the unsolvable problem of healing as it relates to community, repairing what's wrong in society, and really even repioneering a new way in society. And so that's really what this is. This is really talking about that exploration. You can go to the next slide. I saw a problem. I was young-ish. We're talking about 25 years ago. I was doing life, but a few passions had struck me. I liked finding ways to fix stuff. I'm wired to turn on like 99 channels of input and let them kind of wash over me. And then I take that data and put it on a mental whiteboard. And I stand back far enough to see it all. And what I look for is blips in the data, the beacons that illuminate a pattern, or better yet, a formula. And then I stand there and I play with the scenarios through the formula, and I use that inflood of data to refine the formula. And I realized I enjoy doing that until I find a theoretical solution that was at least doable enough to move to the practical application or the phase of solution building. Next slide. I then realized that I liked tinkering with those solutions. And I really enjoyed putting the solutions in spin, especially when other people are put into motion, making the practical application. And what I then enjoyed was then stepping back again and watching the system, social systems work. I enjoyed watching the details very specifically and finding the kinks, the things that didn't work, and then tinker ever so slightly with the formula until I found a working model where the formula consistently provided same-ish kind of responses. Next slide. So over the past 25 years, get to the next one, my life has allowed me to get at least that far in the development process, the thinking, the theoretical framework. On some of the passion projects I've self-funded, in a few of those systems, and really mostly one, but maybe two halves of two other systems, I've gone halfway to the next step of that. I've had the opportunity to take it to that next step of beginning to play with the system and then watching it. Next slide. It says which one went to the next step in the process. I'm gonna come back to that, but there's a backstory that I'll insert here because it plays the relevance to the rest of the story about the one that I took to the next step. Because I was immersed in the data fields of the other areas, the ones that didn't always get to that next step, I became very well versed in several areas of community. And this is in comparison to most who frequently don't have as much information about these areas as I've gathered. I'm a tinkerer in my own mind, but I have a solid mastery of knowledge in comparison to many in the areas of things like food, housing, collective commerce associated with the things or the means we use to convert our excess to things we choose not to produce. So the principles in the formula that I began to put together was a roof overhead, food on the table, a system of exchange of goods and services are the three areas that I've really developed kind of a working mastery. But most of the work has been prototyping, then modifying, and not taking that to the replication where I'm then seeing that go further. Which the one that I have taken to the next step in the formula of revision, however, has been healing. I did the prototype, and like other mad scientists, I tested the medicine on myself. I tweaked the system, then I utilized the results, and I tweaked the system, and the formula got sharper and sharper. Until I finally got to the aha moment. The next slide. It's working consistently enough to produce the desired effects. It's sufficient to attempt the next step of replication. And I very carefully began, because with dealing with healing, like I take that personally, that this could cause negative damage to someone's life. And so it was an experiment, and the first steps, but I gained my confidence and healed the fear, the upcropping fears that showed up for me personally. And I got to the point where I said I can now confidently present a solution, of course, pending forever tweaking of the solution. And even my move to Ecuador is part of the next phase of how I tweak the solution. And so what does that mean in real life? And why have I asked to commandeer a couple of hours of your time? One, I wanted to share with you and have you experience the foundation of the healing tool, and have you really suspend your beliefs or ideals about trauma and consider this theoretical framework of trauma, its causes, especially the ground zero of trauma, and how it happens and how we undo the damage that trauma has caused. And so this theoretical framework is what I've taken and prototyped and then put into use in about the past 10 years, and more specifically the past 5 years, have begun working with this with individuals to see if the formula gave similar kinds of success results. This really is looking for a solution so that if we could solve the unsolvable problem, it would give us a different vantage point for fixing the rest of society and some of the issues that really tie into people. And so I set up the presuppositions about this, that suspend what you know, just so that we can consider whether or not there's some validity that you can see and evaluate. So flip to the next slide. Pretend that you have no idea about trauma, how it happens, nor how to fix it. And we start with an assumption that trauma happens. Trauma and healing that trauma is our best option, and that we should explore frameworks that seem to be promising and work. And that really was my starting point, looking at trauma. And as you hear some of the definitions for how it's defined in this framework, that it took me to a place of saying there's a 100% trauma rate. And so if trauma happens for all of us, the solution should be as broad where most have access. There's probably going to be fringe outliers that may not see relevance in it. But if we're looking for solutions, what's the broadest base of solution that we can provide? And so that's what I'd like for you to do just as our foundation. And the next slide. So I started following my passion, my lane. I found out some things about me. I found a problem that would let me operate that thing in me, the question of how do we fix society? And it really, like, I see things in pictures. And years ago, it was 2003 to be exact, a friend of mine, we were working on some writing projects. I was in seminary and he was querying me about who this was that these people were trying to save and what were they saving them from. And we were having these theoretical conversations. But there was a picture of a dirty mirror. It was an old mirror and it was dirty. And there was something about that picture that struck a chord in me. It was like it's a solution staring at me, yet I don't have the words to put to it. It was a dirty mirror, but I realized then that mirrors always work. But first, we got to take the mud off of the mirror. It was the simplicity of the solution that I then spent quite a few years trying to put words to it. How do we fix mirror? Which really, for me, in the imagery of my mind, is we clean the mirrors of our soul. Those things about us that are core, we do just like when we clean that dirty mirror that I saw in the picture. And then I thought, well, how do we do that? And so my engines began running, and this is really the culmination of that. It's surrounded by the other pieces of how we fix community that tie into putting a roof over people's heads, putting food on the table, and providing the connectedness with commerce that we still require in our society. So trauma, let's start there. So this really is about the experience. So you're going to need some way of being able to record some information, whether that be your computer screen or a note tab or something in writing. That'll be up to you. But the definition of trauma, simply put, Jesse Collins said that anytime there are values that you hold that are conflicted, that is the point of impact. That is the zero. The confliction of values with no judgment made. It simply is you hold to a value and something happens in life that does not align with that value. And then what happens is oftentimes there's a conflict. Many times it creates a feeling of emotions. In a lot of our lives, what then happens is we stuff those emotions and go into processing the situation. Usually we try to make it make sense to us. Oftentimes there's then a response. And if we're acting out of those emotions, sometimes the response follows suit. And oftentimes, if we're in this cycle of traumatizing each other, those behaviors and responses that come from the strong emotions that have been triggered, oftentimes is behavior that also conflicts with the values that you may hold true. An example of that would be you're in a conversation and someone says something to you. It ruffles your feathers. And because your feathers are ruffled, the emotions that you're feeling might be anger or frustration. And you may in turn respond to that person with a very strong defense, with a few choice words, calling them out of their name. And you too have disrespected that individual. And so if we looked at that, the person treated you in a way that did not feel good to you, that may have triggered some emotions from all kinds of reasons, and you may have responded in a way that was less than respectful. So the very respect that you may have been wanting to receive, you just did the same kind of behavior in violating that respect. And Jesse Collins would say, when the person treated you in a way that didn't align with your values for how you'd like to be treated, that was a point of trauma. But he would also say when you responded in a way that violated your values for treating people with respect, you too contributed to the trauma in your life. And so he created a way for us to have a framework to unpack that trauma. And if you flip forward, for me, it was finding this tool and then saying, wait a minute, hold on. Maybe this is the beginning tingling of a solution to that unsolvable problem. You can forward to the next slide. One of the things that Jesse Collins did was he was using this in a therapeutic environment, but he spent some time and made some writings as he began to realize that trauma might be a little bit bigger and that this was giving promising results. And it was like a manifesto that says this needs to be at the community level. And that's the work that has followed for me. And so with the idea suspended, let's start. The first thing that I'd like for you to do to be able to experience this is I want you to scan through maybe the last week or month and think about an incident in your own personal experience that felt significant, that you can remember feeling some uncomfortable emotions, something that got you spinning in a way that didn't feel positive and joyful. Scan through, see if you can come up with an incident. It's probably a moment of time that just lasted a few brief minutes. And as you scan through your memory, do you have a scenario that comes to mind? Got one? What about you, Lucas?
Yep.
Got a scenario that comes to mind?
Got one.
Perfect. Let's flip to the next slide because the first part of this process starts the unweaving. And so we're going to take about 5 minutes. If you need a little more time, that's fine. But the first thing you're going to do is you're going to take that moment in time. And if you can put that moment in time in 6 words or less as a title of this narrative, I encourage you to do that. 6 words or less. What would you call that incident? And if you got those 6 words, and 6 means 6-ish, but it's just narrowing that incident down, give it a name, give it a title, something that's meaningful to you, that if you repeated it again, you'd say, yep, I remember that incident. And then in the next 5 minutes, the instructions that I'd like to give you are to first write a narrative. Only facts, in first and second person, that's I and you if it involved another individual. Only in past tense because this is an event that has already happened. The only deviation from the facts are to indicate your feelings. If you're looking for words, you can pull up a feeling wheel or a feeling words list. The internet's got a whole lot of them. In the training, I oftentimes have feeling wheels and lists of words to prompt people to scan. And you can put as much detail as you can, or you can go shallow and put as few details. But I want you to explain what happened. It's kind of like the facts, only the facts and your feelings. So we're going to take about 5 minutes in your head. I'm playing the proverbial Jeopardy music to give you just a few minutes of time. And I'd like for you to narrate that event with details. First and second person, I did this, this happened. And then your feelings. I felt, and with as much detail as you can provide for that incident. So I'm going to give you guys about 5 minutes to compile that information. And if you finish sooner, just let me know. How'd you guys do with that? Still writing?
Yep. I think I'm done.
I think I'm done. Yep.
Take a look back through it, only facts, and you identified the emotions that you can, the things that you felt from that situation. Great. Any difficulty with that step? Were any of you inclined to put explanation or justification in that step of it, or were you able to very clearly indicate the facts?
I would have to cross out some explanations.
Very good.
Because yeah, when I say what I felt, I say I felt this because of that, and I maybe don't need to add the because of that.
Yes, exactly. This is a step that sometimes people have problems with, being able to simply state the facts of a scenario, facts of an incident. Before we go on to the next piece of it, and you can go to the next slide, this tool is best used, this tool has a component that involves community in a way that does reintegration. Oftentimes trauma and the stuff that goes through our head that's as a result of that trauma, usually that happens, or oftentimes that happens in isolation. And so there is a component of this that brings it back into the community setting. And so it's the idea that each one of us heals individually, and that's personal, but there is the opportunity to do that healing together. And so the next slide talks about those ground rules for the healing circle component. And we'll talk about it, and we'll just do some of that in the experience. But the first thing that we do when we're doing this in that collective setting and working through that portion of it is we establish some ground rules, some assumptions, some agreements with individuals. And this next slide really talks about those agreements. In a training situation, we would go through these agreements, and we would ask if there's any other agreements that people need to be able to feel safe and to be able to share in an environment that feels safe. And I'll go through these, and we'll see if these agreements are okay for us to move forward. The first is do center the trauma victim. During the portion where we are interacting with our writings, that the focus is on the individual who's doing the reading at that time. We encourage participants to not use expressions that divert the trauma away from the emotional experience. And that would be things like, it wasn't that bad, it's okay, you're gonna be okay, or that move them to a place that tries to soothe what's happening. Instead, we want to center it on the trauma victim at the time. We do encourage the listening in support. And this is a setting that giving advice is not appropriate. Oftentimes we think, and the intentions are good, but it can actually be harming. And so we encourage individuals not to give advice in this setting. We do ask you to reflect on your feelings. We do not give opinions. Someone else's trauma is their responsibility to work through and resolve. The reflection that we do when we encourage identification is about reflecting on your feelings and your feelings alone. In this setting, you trying to feel how someone else feels, we do not find that to be relevant to the healing process for you or for them. And so we encourage whatever's happening for the focus to be on your feelings. Even if you're listening to someone else's experience, what are you feeling at the time? We do want you to offer supportive encouragement. And that's visual encouragement. When someone's sharing, you see some physical motion, they're tapping their hand, you may see someone cry, you may see them rocking back and forth or patting their foot. Those are visual observations, and those are encouraged. The fifth item on here is we encourage you to use identification, not empathy. Going back to the other point up ahead, you feeling how someone else feels is not a part of this process. And so what we encourage you to do is, if you hear a story and there's emotions that are shared, can you identify with them? Can you think through your life's experience? And if someone is sharing about being frustrated or angry, is there a time from your life that you also felt frustrated or angry? Can you identify from your own experience? Because what that may do is prompt you to see other places in you where you too have had similar kinds of emotions. The cause may be different, but it allows us to be able to connect that our lives have had experiences like this. And part of what that does is it also gives us a greater sense oftentimes of compassion for others, that we've understood from our experience feeling feelings like that, and we understand how that's impacted us. And so we encourage you to use identification versus empathizing with someone in an attempt to feel what they may be feeling in this time. We do encourage you to connect with the circle, connect with whoever may be reading or speaking, and we ask that you participate as fully as you are emotionally able to participate. Do those agreements sound like those are agreements that we can come to and that would make you feel like this is a safe environment to share? Would there be any other agreements that you would feel necessary to feel safe in the environment to share today? Okay.
All good here.
All right,
Yeah.
so if we're in agreement on how we're going to interact with each other, the first part of this process, we will actually go through the process and do the sharing. So each of you has prepared a story.
Yeah.
Now, what we'll ask for you to do is to read your story. And what we will do is we will listen. Once you are done sharing the moment and the emotions, then what we will do is each person will have an opportunity, if there are emotions that you can identify with, to share those. And if there's any other physical observations, to share that as well. And so, Lucas, why don't you start with your reading and we will listen.
Okay. So the title is Teaching Something That I Thought Was Not Appropriate for the People Being Taught. That's the title. And then the facts was that for that particular lesson, I didn't get ready. The people doing the teaching went ahead and did the teaching against my hunch that that wasn't right for the age.
So let's stop. This is great. Usually the first one is where I do some interjecting.
Yeah.
So the story should start with, I was offering some teaching.
Yeah.
What's the first person? I and what did I do?
So I didn't do, because in this case, what happens was that I didn't get ready to do the teaching.
Okay.
I was supposed to prepare something and I didn't do it.
Okay, so the story would say I was supposed to prepare a
teaching, and I failed to do it, or I didn't do it. I did not do it.
And then what happened?
And then what happened was that the group went ahead and the teaching happened, and the students understood only half of it, and
okay, so pause. So we only want facts.
Yeah.
So I was supposed to prepare a teaching and I did not do that.
Yes.
You went on with the class.
Yes.
With the class and presented half of the information or part of the information?
No, presented all the information, and the students said things that made me realize, I think.
Nope. The students, several students came to me after the class?
During the class, they used the words of what they were learning in a way that showed that they had not understood what they were saying.
So nope, only facts. Okay, several students. What did the students do?
The students repeated what they had understood.
Repeated what
they had understood.
Yeah.
In a way that was not.
Nope. What happened?
Yeah.
The students repeated information from the class.
Yeah.
And then what happened?
What happened was that I noticed something and nobody else noticed that something. I
No,
noticed that they had not understood, but I don't know how to say that more
all of
factually.
that is analysis. Nope, all
Yeah.
of that is analysis.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Tell me the facts of the story.
So the facts of the story
Several
was
students repeated information from the class
from the class
while you were listening,
while I was listening.
while I was listening. And then you were listening, and then what did you do next, or what happened next?
I stayed quiet. I didn't say what I had observed.
I sat quietly.
I sat quietly. I didn't participate. I didn't collaborate.
I sat quietly. I did not participate.
Yeah.
Did anything else happen?
In terms of facts, no. The class went on and things happened.
So let me repeat this and see if this sounds accurate as your story.
Okay.
I was supposed to prepare a teaching and I did not do it.
Yeah.
You went on with the class and presented all of the information. Several students repeated information from the class while I was listening. I sat quietly. I did not participate.
Yes.
Was
Correct.
there anything else that actually happened?
No.
And you felt when that experience happened, or even now, I felt what?
I felt angry. I felt unwilling to cooperate.
Give me a feeling word. What was your feeling?
The feeling word is I felt angry.
Keep going. You said uncooperative.
Angry, uncooperative, and resentful, I think.
Resentful.
Yeah.
What else did you feel? The students repeated information. You listened to that information. Yeah. What did you feel when you heard that information?
My feeling was of fear that damage has happened here, that they have misunderstood.
I felt fearful.
Fearful, yeah.
Okay, any other feelings that you felt?
I felt, yeah, what do you say when you feel you want to go away? No, just that, anger, I think.
Okay.
Anger.
All right. Did you hear the difference in the story without the things that weren't facts? The story was very short, the actual things that happened.
Yeah.
Was that clearer to you in that process?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
So you start with a draft and then you cross things out because they are not what belongs in here.
So normally the first few times I work with someone, their urge is to put all of that extra stuff in.
Yeah.
And what I tell them is reserve all of that extra stuff until we get to the end. Yeah. And if when we get to the end, you don't feel the resolution and you want to pick back up all of that analysis, then do so, but do it at the end, because the rest of that part of the story doesn't help us get to resolution.
Okay.
And so we start this process, and the first couple of times before someone would do the reading, I would go through and work with them on editing it, because we want them to learn the process.
Okay.
This is a framework. And so usually the first couple of times I do just what we're doing here. Sometimes we do it in writing first so that they learn the process, because what you're learning is to specify the facts.
Yeah.
I got a phone call. They asked me to teach a class, and I said I would teach the class. And then I did not make the time, and I did not prepare the lesson. And you taught the class without my assistance. I sat in the class and I listened to the information, and then the students got up and shared information from the class, and I sat there and I felt
Angry. Yeah.
so we're teaching. All right, all right. When I listened to that, I felt disappointment and frustration.
That is your comment.
My comment. And
Yeah.
what you would do is, because that has nothing to do with you or your situation, normally we'd have you give a verbal cue that you'd heard and simply say, thank you. And so I'm offering that observation and my identification, and you would say, thank you.
Okay. And
Renee,
you're not using empathy. You are
not
saying
empathy.
I have felt angry too. or
I have
something
been
like-
in the backstory in my head, which is part of what we don't share because that would then center my situation and not your situation. The backstory in my head that makes me identify with that. I've been in situations and some numbskull gets up and teaches folk and they halfway don't even understand it themselves. And then the people don't understand it and the woo, woo, woo. And then you go, oh man, this was a waste of my time. And I feel frustrated and disappointed that they wasted my time. So that's the backstory. But because I'm not centering my trauma.
Yeah.
I just identify so that you understand that I have had a time in my life, and hearing your story makes me identify with some times in my life, maybe because of the incident, maybe because I've also felt angry in my life, and it may have nothing to do with your incident or anything like that. I simply am saying, can I think of a time where I've been angry? Yep, that one. I can think of that. And so this is the part that reinstates community, that you're not feeling these emotions all by yourself.
Yeah.
Like real life says, me too, me too. Okay. Vinay, any response of identification for Lucas?
I had a question to ask.
Sure.
Where does that fit? Does that happen now or does that happen later? There was something about Lucas's story that I didn't understand.
So if we were in an actual setting, you would not ask any questions because Lucas has got to process his own stuff in his own time, in his own way, and we let him.
Gotcha. Okay.
But for today's purpose, question. What was the question?
So the question was, Lucas said something about wanting to run away from the situation.
Yeah.
Right. And then after said, no, I was just angry. So there was something there that I didn't quite get. So
in that situation, he was explaining something that really was a feeling, but he couldn't come up with the words to encapsulate the nuances of that. We would have feeling lists of words because part of that is you go as deep as you have the desire and capacity to. And one of the reasons that people don't go deep is they don't have the words. If we had a word list, let me see. If I were to pull up a word list, it might be things like I felt wanting to run away. I felt disconnected. I felt avoidance.
Yeah.
I felt
that would have helped.
Avoidance might be some in that direction of feeling.
That would have helped in this case because I would have found a word that would have meant I don't belong here, because you can storm away from a place because you want to avoid being hurt by others, or because you want to avoid hurting them.
Yes.
Or because you feel a disconnect.
Yeah.
Like, this is not my place.
I felt evasive.
Yeah.
I felt non-participatory.
Yeah.
I felt
So that
so part of this process, and we give them some working tools, but part of this is that as people learn to communicate more, it actually builds emotional intelligence.
Yeah.
What he did was, my emotional intelligence right there at that moment did not have the capacity to fully explain all of the feelings that I was having. And so going through this process more and more, one of the side benefits that I found is just by learning to use this process more effectively, I start people with the feeling wheels and the list, and I tell them, go through that list of 100 and some words and see if there's any of these words that feel similar to what you might have been feeling. Oh, this was a little bit. Yeah, a little bit of that, a little bit of this. The other part is it shows them how complicated those feelings are, and we're unweaving them. That's literally what we're doing, is unweaving them. So that was a good observation, and that's part of what this process helps to build in a very natural way, because we never talk about emotional intelligence. We simply say, are there any other words that you can use for feeling? And someone else may say a word, and you say, like I may say, I felt evasive, and you said because what happens is your response to me is simply thank you. After Vinay shares, I come back to you and say, are there any other feelings that apply to this situation? And you'd say, evasive. I felt evasive. I felt defensive. I felt okay. Vinay, any emotions for you in identification or any visual observations that you made while Lucas was reading?
Visual observations.
Any? Did you see him crying? Did you see anything that stood out to you? Maybe so, maybe not.
Yeah, okay, I understand. Let me have a think. Yeah, so I have a feeling of curiosity. Like, I feel like there are a lot of other parts that are just off the edge of the narrative that I don't understand. So the main feeling for me is curiosity and feeling like I don't really understand the exact nature of the drama.
So you understanding his trauma, not the goal. When you listened to his story, was there anything that you could identify from your life, either the experience gave you something from your life that you remembered, or the emotions gave you something from your life that you can identify with? Because we don't want to have to it would be emotional work to understand somebody else's trauma when Lucas is responsible for resolving it, not us. So this process narrows it, because we don't want you to pick up any of the energy from him. We only want things that are helpful to you, because when you identify those emotions, there also might be unhealed spots for you to say, oh, wait, I got something else.
See. So what you're looking for at this step is resonances. You're looking for people where people share a story. They have something, not that they tell the story, but where they share something in common with the story.
Yes.
So somebody tells a story about their father getting killed in a car crash. Somebody else loses their father in a house fire, and they say, I felt this. This is what we're looking for here.
Or someone has felt a loss of some kind. And so when that person says, I feel lost, they say, have I ever felt loss? Oh, I lost my toy.
Right. So for me, there's this sense of like, oh my God, these idiots, right? So the emotional resonance for me is like, oh, the idiots.
No. What's your feeling? Feeling words
only. So the idiots is the story that happens in the frontal cortex. The emotion is, I am angry.
So
that would be the red hat.
So I share the feeling of frustration at the idiots.
Without the commentary, but
without the comment of the idiot.
I identify with feeling frustrated. That would be the response for this time.
Are we allowed in this context to say frustrated at people or frustrated at myself? Or is that too? No, frustrated.
No, the preference is I felt, because part of this is learning that you don't have to give justification. I felt angry. It doesn't matter why you felt angry. It doesn't matter who you felt angry at. That's your personal work.
Yeah, that's so red hat.
Angry. Because if you start qualifying it, then you avoid just dealing. I feel angry. I'm going to feel angry until I'm done feeling angry. And when I'm done feeling angry, then I will move on to finish processing this, not before.
My favorite therapist says, don't tell me the story. Go to the feeling. What are you actually feeling?
Yes. So we've given our identification. Lucas has looked at Vinay and said, thank you.
Thank you.
And then I come back and say, Lucas, are there any other emotions that you felt either then or now that you can identify, and you would say?
Impatience.
Felt
I don't think anything else.
Thank you. And so that would be the end of the first step.
Okay.
First step. And then you've got these emotions. I felt angry. I felt impatient. I felt all of these things.
Yeah.
And then you as the individual are responsible for giving space to those emotions, and then deciding when you're ready to go to the next step of this healing process.
So
that makes sense? Is that clear?
Yes, but how do I make space for those emotions? Is there any recommendation?
You're angry. Are you still feeling angry? Or you feel like you can now move on to processing? You've identified that you're angry?
Yeah, I can move on to processing.
Because part of it's honest, it's being honest. You might not have been able to process and move on in that moment.
Yeah.
Now you're a little bit removed. Yeah, I felt angry about it, but I'm in a good headspace that I can move on and work through this process now. Because what happens is when we don't deal with the emotions, we stuff them and they fester.
Yeah.
You wanted to go on to all that analysis before we identified and addressed and gave space and honor to those feelings.
Yeah.
That usually is where trauma starts putting down its tentacle. The event's already happened, but I'm analyzing this and I haven't even stopped to say, wait a minute, what am I feeling? I'm angry. This is making me angry. We feel it sometimes. I get tense, I get anxious, I'm feeling something, but we go into the processing and we don't oftentimes come back and unpack that part of the process.
Yeah.
When you begin using this tool and use it in real time, you begin to be able to do this thought process in real time. This really provides a framework for thinking. And that's why it has some of the other residual benefits that I talked about last meeting, okay?
And the thing is, after I have noticed my anger for enough number of seconds, there's nothing else to say about it.
I felt angry.
Yeah.
No judgment. No judgment. Is it okay?
And people around me have said, yes, I know what anger feels, and I have heard you.
Gives you communication tools.
Yeah. Okay. Got it.
Vinay, would you like to read or give us your story?
Okay. So the person I share a house with got COVID.
So you'd be saying you got COVID. This would be the you in your story?
Yeah.
Okay.
So what happened, right? You got COVID at a social event. You tested when you got sick a few days after the event. You isolated. I sorted you out with food and medicine while you were isolated. I continued to test negative for COVID. You recovered and seemed basically fine.
And seemed basically fine. Is that a fact?
Yes.
Or is that your observation or analysis of that? Did he say they were fine? Did they tell you they were fine?
Seems
you saw no
Did
symptoms.
you not see symptoms?
Some report of feeling a little kind of tired for a couple of days, and that seems to be gone. So yeah, all indicators are fine.
So they told me you were feeling better.
Oh yeah, sure.
That would be the fact. That would be the fact versus you felt better when you would have to have read their mind and felt their body's internal to be able to make that a fact. If they told you they were feeling better, that's the fact.
Yeah, I see.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's.
Yep, got it.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, red hat and white hat. Totally.
I felt.
Yeah. You telling me what you feel is a fact for me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I felt angry that I was at risk, accepting that life can't stay still forever, frightened that I would get sick.
Take the commentary off. Avoid the commentary in this part. I felt.
So angry, accepting, frightened, and frightened again. Two different frightens.
Thank you. Lucas, identification. I felt
when I heard that story that we're talking about, I felt angry, very angry, generally angry, and a little bit of fear. Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And so Vinay would say, thank you. And then I would say, I felt, oh, the word just left me. I felt endangered. I felt concerned, and
Yeah.
I felt
Yeah.
sitting duck-ish. I'll just leave it at those words, because
Sitting
part of that
duckish,
is,
like not paralyzed, not being able to do anything, or
yeah, something like that. So those
something
were
like that.
emotions.
Yeah.
I felt that. And then Vinay, any other emotions that came to mind for you?
Let me just think. Yeah. Again, here's the problem. I'm trying to find the word for it. What is that feeling? Yeah, so what I felt was a sort of generalized disgust for the whole situation.
I felt disgusted.
Yeah.
Disgust.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. And so that would be step one of the process.
Okay.
This is the foundational, and the first few times it's challenging for some individuals, and some individuals have a very difficult time being able to just state the facts. Their want to give the explanations and the commentary usually are very, very strong for a lot of people.
Yeah. And there's an interesting thing here. So you get the dry narrative on one side, and you get the emotions completely detached from the story on the other.
Yeah.
So the emotions don't come with an explanation packet attached.
Yeah.
They just have the emotions, which are then fully decontextualized.
Yeah.
You know, people say they're angry, they don't say why they're angry. So at that point, we have the story in its barest form, and we have the emotions in their barest form. It's very essential.
Yeah. It's
So
that's interesting.
That's the foundation for the rest of the process.
Yeah.
But as you can see, it sets up some of those implications that I've talked about. And one of those is light processing skills, conflict resolution, being able to have effective communication with other individuals, and emotional intelligence. That's just kind of an aside in this bubble. Let's go on to the slide for step two. Once we've done that and the individual has taken the time to process their emotions, maybe we're doing this in a group setting and they come back the next day, if it's in the retreat setting, or the next week, if we're having healing circles as part of our community healing. The next slide will tell us, give you the details.
One question. If we are having several people processing their own stuff in parallel, would you have a session where everyone does the facts and emotions?
So in the
healing, or would you process one person till the end of that person and then go to the next person?
If this was in a healing circle setting, think of AA for people whose addiction is trauma.
Yep.
You would be processing your work. You might be on story number 1. Vinay might be on step number 3, and I might be on step number 5. We all have an opportunity to do the reading, and the feedback loop is identical. The only thing that you as a listener can do is I felt, and give emotion words, no commentary, because that would be centering you and not the person that you're listening to, and visual feedback. We keep that specific because we don't give them advice. You're not here to even be concerned with their trauma, because you aren't going to heal it. You have your own stuff to work on. And so in that setting, I can be at step 1 and you can be at step 3 on your 15th story that you're working on. And we can all participate in this healing circle format together. So each person is independently, but we're doing it together. That gives us that community reconnection component. So the second step of the process is where we really now get into the analysis. You've had time for the frustration to subside enough for you to get back to sanity. Because sometimes when you're triggered by those emotions, think of a person who has an addiction and they go and pull their drug of choice off the shelf and use it, and then you try to have a logical conversation with them. That's probably not the best time to do logical thinking with someone. And when our emotions get triggered and we're in the midst of those emotions, we need for that to subside, come down off that high. And then we move to the logical part of this processing. So the next part of this process, we're still working with the same incident, the same moment that you talked about, but we now are going to identify the values. Those and values are sometimes shaped as assumptions, expectations, and this is for everyone involved. What were the values that happened in this place, in your particular situation? One of the values for you, Vinay, might be, I expected my roommate to use safety precautions because he lives in a co-housing situation and knows that it affects other people, or some variation of that. My value for cooperative safety or cooperative responsibility for each other, or something that you frame. And you want to look at your situation and see if you can't list the values, not only those that you brought to the story, but perhaps the values that were operating by other people. Part of this is assumption. It's the values as you see them played out, but your framework of values is very important, and you'll see that in a minute. So let's take just a few moments. If you can take and jot down the values that were in play. For you, Lucas, the values might be, I am not obligated to teach this class unless I accept responsibility. Are you responsible for educating these students? Because that may be a value. I am in a role where I am responsible for these students having a certain competency of learning, or whatever. So take a few moments and let's begin to identify. Again, values in your mind might also sound like, these are my presuppositions about this interaction. These are my expectations, were my expectations for this situation as it relates to the incident or the interactions. So let's take a few minutes, and if you can just code agree or disagree as you begin to write them. Did you agree or did you disagree with those? We'll do that step. Listing of the values. In addition to that, what were your losses and how did you respond? This is where, Lucas, you say, I did this, and some of that, I did not participate. I sat quietly. Some of those are your responses. So what your values are,
so
what your losses were, and losses could be things like, I lost quality of life because of the stress about catching COVID. That was, however you'd frame that loss. Those are sometimes losses. The loss of having time where you felt good, you know, the quality piece. And then how did you respond? Either thoughts or actions related to that event. So let's take a few minutes and do that. Values.
Question. So you mentioned values for other people. So we also write down something about what we think somebody else's values were.
As you saw them expressed, when you saw that behavior.
So this is a phrase like, your values, you know, your values are X because you did Y, something like that. How do, give me some sense of the language.
Value as your assessment of the values in play for someone else would be, you are only responsible. You took your own safety. Let's see, value for someone else.
You value social interaction more than you value
than my safety.
Okay, got it. Yeah.
Yeah. because you went there, social environment, probably didn't have a mask, da 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 da. You place that value greater than the safety of the home. You know.
Yeah, got it.
That would be the way that, and you can frame it. This is kind of, you frame it however you frame it, but we want to get to the crux of what that assessment for you is.
But
Because what
the kind
we're
of
showing here, we're showing the values that you had in play and the values that were opposing that, because this is where we begin to see the ground zero. Where's the conflict? You put that ahead of me being safe at home. I got an issue now with that. And we've got a grading right there in that point. So do the best you can in this particular part. This is another one that's challenging because people don't often think in values or expectations.
Yeah,
What
but
were
the linguistic construct is you valued or some you assumed, and so it's written with this you statement on the front of it.
Yes.
Got it. Now I understand.
Yes. Yeah. So let's take a few minutes to do that. Your values, assumptions, expectations, your losses, and your responses. What did you actually do? What did you actually think? What was the trigger thing for you? And let's take a few minutes. And just let me know when you get to the end of that sequence of writing events. And are you guys getting to the, values, losses, responses? Let's just go through this briefly. Normally we do the circle thing and give the feedback, but so that we can get through all the steps.
Okay.
Why don't you, Lucas, give me it's the
So
sample of what you got.
My values, presuppositions, and assumptions were that I value having my own opinion rather than following the opinion of a book. And you assumed that I had agreed with you when in fact I didn't, but you assumed that I was agreeing to the book style. So those are my values, the value that I see in myself and the value that I interpret from the other person.
Okay. The other part of that value would be the assumption was made without asking you.
Yes.
Okay. Okay. Because there may be some pieces of that. So again, this is one of those things that you can go deep or as shallow as you want. Dig down, dig down, dig down. But that's a personal choice. There's no wrong. There's no wrong.
Yeah.
What were your losses? What did you lose as in the result of this?
I lost sense of cohesion, my internal sense of being part of something of working together to some goal.
Yep.
And I lost a percentage of the willingness to participate in the future.
Very good, very good. And then were there any things that you did afterwards? I know initially in the writing.
So initially I didn't cooperate and I said nothing. And then later what I did was I waited for some reaction and waited and waited. Nothing happened. So the issue wasn't raised.
Okay. Okay. Very good. Thank you. Any other feelings that come to mind that we can add to that list of feelings that you had?
Nothing new, maybe disappointment.
Okay, disappointment. And you would go write disappointment on that list because we carry this over to later and you'd write that in. Thank you.
Okay.
The name?
Hearing the thank you is very powerful, by the way, if I may reflect on that.
The other part of what this teaches, the backstory, this is the nuances of this, is that when you learn to hear how other people process their life, you can simply say, thank you. LaRahna, you should da-da-da-da-da-da. Thank you. You need to da-da-da-da. Thank you. Am I going to do it? Hell no. You ain't got good sense telling me what I should be doing about my situation. No, I'm not going to do it. But thank you, because my value says you are entitled to think whatever you want to, even if it's dysfunctional and ignorant. My own judgment. So it's a practice of the urge to respond and defend comes out of the ego space. I said what I said, not asking for a response. Thank you is all the response necessary. Imagine what that would do in an argument. Thank you for sharing your insight.
You need to buy an SUV. Thank you.
All right, Vinay.
Okay, so for the presuppositions, values, assumptions, expectation. You presupposed that a partial return to normal life was safe. I expected you would get COVID eventually, but that seemed inevitable regardless of precautions, so I accepted the risk. You valued rebuilding a social life after several years of isolation. I assume I'm going to remain relatively isolated until I'm not under so much pressure at work.
Yeah.
Right. I value staying well and productive above all other values in an absolute way.
Yeah.
And I expect that you have to return to some kind of daily life at some point.
Losses.
Okay, so losses and responses. I lost a little time from busy week, basically just kind of cooking and stuff like that, and no response. I lost the sense that COVID had more or less gone from my world. I'm kind of grumbly about that, but no response. I lost the chance of a fairly safe, large social gathering. So, at my house with, windows open, air filters, whatever. And the response is that event is replanned. You lost a well-planned birthday event with lots of people coming in from out of town. You
Not
are
his losses.
depressed.
Pause there. None of his losses. His losses are not relevant to you.
Oh,
Scratch
okay.
his losses off your list. Only yours.
Okay, got it. All right.
Okay.
So those are my
Did that
losses.
capture all of yours? Okay.
Yeah.
Very good. Very good.
Good.
Any questions on that part of the process?
No, very clear.
Very
Let's go
clear.
on to the next slide.
Very clear.
So this next step is really when someone's doing a deep dive, not as relevant today because we're dealing with one story. If someone perhaps were going through the coaching and let's say they're dealing with a relationship, my mother, for instance, what I would be doing is I'd be doing all my step 1 incidents together. It might be 30, 40, 50. I'd go through that process before I went on to step 2.
Really?
And then when I got done with step 2, this is really a helpful step because you begin consolidating. So all of the losses get listed. All of the emotions get listed. You're combining things to be able to use in the next step of this. But for we're going to skip past this, but there is a synthesis step for those who are doing groups of things. It might be several incidents of sexual abuse. It might be several incidents of domestic violence. It might be incidents of trauma as it relates to resettling. It might be other kinds of things, a natural disaster that you've experienced and that you're dealing with the trauma of that. So people can group these things together. Or you can do this one incident has come to the surface. I'm going to deal with this one incident. Both options work fine.
Yeah.
Let's go on to the next step in the process.
Brilliant.
We categorize those responses. And what we do is we kind of number them. So every time you sat quietly, every time you cussed them out, every time you gave them a left hook, we're grouping these things together, incidents that seem like they can connect. And for each category of values, and we're talking about your values now, each category of values, we list which ones we agree with and which ones we conflict with and the losses in this particular format.
Okay. I'm not, not quite getting this. I think maybe if you do Lucas first, I'll understand it from there, but there's something in there.
So on the slide that says step 3, we would simply, there's a worksheet. I have some templates that I have in the journal, a worksheets like, and what they would do is it would be in columns. And you take all of your responsive behavior.
So we're grouping it by the responses. So the common thing is not the values that are in play. The common thing is we're now clustering all the places where we responded in the same way to one or multiple incidents. Got it. Okay, now that was what I was missing. Yeah. Got it.
Step 2 deals with the incident and the values of the incident and whether you were in conflict or not with those values. It took the incident. This next part is preparing, because in step 4, we take your responses. So we then turn this, instead of it being the mirror on the incident where there's both parties at play, and you've been able to see where the conflict of values were, we now look at all of your responses, the what did you do? And we do the same evaluation, because part of the trauma may come from someone violating our values. But then we also, once we see that, oh, your value was this, my value was this. That's why we had an incident that did not feel good. We now move on, because that's one part of the ground zero of trauma. The second part, though, is any part of your behavior that violated your values is also a part of the trauma under this model. So what we do is we take all of the responses, all of the what you did, and we're going to, in step 4, do an evaluation of that. It's isolating now. This is the trauma that I have created in my life versus this is the trauma because of our conflict.
Okay,
Question,
so
Lucas?
just as an example, if I reacted by going quiet, that goes against my values of communicating, telling the truth, calling a spade, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And that is secondary trauma for me.
Absolutely. Do you see that?
Blooming heck.
That is the connection. And
Yes.
what I found as an aside is a majority of the trauma that keeps happening in my life is my fault. I'm the one doing it. Every time I close my mouth, if my value is of communicating what I'm feeling to others, communicating honestly and clearly and forthcoming, if that is my value, I have then just violated my very own value. Part of this trauma I have to own, but this is also part of the trauma that I can control.
Yeah.
Okay, so step 3 would be grouping those things. If you had 50 stories that you've done, your responses may be, I was quiet here and here and here and here. We don't need to list 15 I was quiets. We group that, I was quiet. Yeah. And then you look through, and so what you do is you list them all individually and then you number them. So the first one may say I was quiet, but the 7th one may say I was quiet. That's going to be your A. And you go through, and everyone that was quiet gets an A. And everyone that was I hit you in your mouth gets a B. Oop, I hit somebody else. Oop, that's a B. I hit somebody down here. That's a B. And you group them. And then the worksheet format then says, now list those unduplicated responses, categorized. Right. But list those unduplicated responses, because then we're going to process them. So 3 is just the mechanics of doing that. If you go to step number 4,
that would be next slide.
Step number 4 is almost the same process as step number 2, except now we're focused very sharply on my behavior. So I want you to take just a few moments. Everything that was what you did, see if you can identify the values, the losses, and did they conflict? Well, identify the values. Did you conflict with them? Because there's some things that you do and you say, nope, I did not conflict with them. Because maybe you were quiet because someone was irate and yelling. And so your value to de-escalate the situation made you be quiet. That may have no conflictions with your values. So,
but there might be an element, and I want to identify that element.
That's right. You can go as deep as you want to. So values, whether you agreed or conflicted, and what were your losses because of that confliction. So take a few moments and do that. We're speaking just of your behaviors, your actions in your scenario.
Gets messy fast.
Mm-hmm. This is the messiness of healing.
Because one of the difficulties is that I have more than one value about the same thing.
List the values. That's exactly the problem. They're all interconnected. This is to help you unweave them. Some values, there's no confliction. Some values there are. This lets you know which part of what you did created trauma because you went against your values, or it puts your values in front of you where you said, I told him what to do. And your value may be, telling people what to do is not my value. Hold on, we're going to stop telling people what to do. So sometimes this part of the process lets you see and identify your values. It's up to you to decide which ones you hold on to past this process.
Okay.
Okay. So
now we're identifying the values, losses, and response.
No, these are your responses. Values, values, confliction, yes or no, and losses of your responses. And so as you do that, this allows you now to have a second set of losses. You've identified some of the values tied into your behavior, and you now have a second set of losses. Now, each of these steps would be done where there would be that reading interaction, because there's another part of reading this outline, and you would simply read the values, you'd read your, it's a confliction or not a confliction, and my losses. You'd simply read it like you'd read a bullet pointed list. And then we'd ask if there's any emotions that come up in addition to that that haven't already been identified. And so just for the sake of time, let's just focus on the losses you identified. So Lucas, what were the losses you identified based on your behaviors?
Yeah, so because of my response, I lost connection, and I lost enthusiasm. I lost, yeah, the extreme would be the will to live, but it wasn't that bad.
Okay, all right. You come back.
Yeah.
All right, Vinay, what about you?
So for me, the loss was a sense of precise integrity.
Okay, very good. All right, so that part of the step, again, we'd go through all the parts, what your values were, and that putting the values and assumptions into words is oftentimes also very challenging for individuals. Training themselves to really think, what did you expect that person to do? I expected you to be considerate of my well-being. I expected, we don't talk in covenant language of expectations and assumptions and things like that. And so that's a part of the process. We'd go through the similar to what we did with step 2. And then we move on to step 5. And this is simply a retelling. Step 5, the first part of step 5 is we look at the losses from step 2. On your worksheet in the journal, you would list the responses from step 2. And if you could put them in groupings, it's not necessary, but it gives you some additional depth. What were the individual losses? What were the relationship losses? What were the family losses? Because of someone else's, you in your story's behavior. Because of your behavior, I experienced these losses. And then because of my behavior, I experienced these losses. And you would then go through, and the reading would be, I lost this, I lost this. You'd preface it, because of your behavior or the behavior in the interaction, I lost this, 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 this. Because of my behavior, I suffered these losses as well. And that's step 5. That again is the synthesis, bringing together the cumulative basket of losses that this experience has given to you. And so we identified those losses in that way. Okay, do you guys both see that? The step 2 losses and the step 4 losses. Step 2 are typically those losses because of someone else's behavior and their confliction with your values. Yeah. And step 4 are the losses that were as a result of you living and operating out of alignment with the values that you are holding on to. Okay. Another example of this and how this may be used, if you are a white supremacist and you think that Black people are less than you and someone forces you to work and treat them with equity, that violates your values and that will create trauma for you. Someone else's behavior, because you're holding on to that value of betterness, would then create trauma for you at that moment. And then your behavior, if you have a value that says, I don't treat people with disrespect, and then you've treated this person with disrespect and justified it because the color of their skin, you'd see that part of that is the trauma that comes from you. But in cultural settings, this framework would say that civil rights movement traumatized both sides of the equation. Everybody got traumatized. Slavery traumatized both sides of the equation because something within you just knew that killing a human being had some negative impact, yet you did it and justified it with the explanations. So part of this in use in community settings helps to really sort out so that you're dealing with apples and oranges, because we don't judge what the values are. That's the rest of the spiritual work. Is that value legitimate? Are people really worse than you? Yeah, well, let's talk about that. Your good book says otherwise, or your other value system says something else. Which one do you hold on to and which one do you let go? But we've listed that, we've gone through step 5, and now we get to really the end of the process, because now that you've had the opportunity to unpack that, this is time to really speak to yourself. Part of this is about where were you at in your thinking before? Where were you at now? Now that you've sorted these things out, what really is your story to yourself? So I'll give you guys just about 2 minutes to maybe write yourself a brief note. This is where people can do it any way. They can write a poem for themselves. They can make a collage. This is a way for them to creatively speak to themselves in a way that's meaningful. So I want you to take just about 2 minutes. And what's your note to self on this side of that particular moment that we've been unpacking? What's your revelation? What's your realization? If you're taking an emotional look in the mirror, what do you see? And this is you talking to yourself from your most loving place. What would you say to you now that we've unpacked this particular situation for you to review? So let's take just about 2 minutes and then we'll share that. And then I'll be at the end of the time that we've allocated for today.
Wow. Amazing. Done.
Done?
Yeah.
And if you'd like, go ahead and let's share that.
Yeah. So the advice I would give to myself, or the resolution in terms of New Year's resolution, the intention for the future is, next time I find myself in that kind of situation, either I go with the value of sharing my opinion beforehand and say that I will not participate, or I do it and let go of the emotions because my higher value is to contribute to the team.
If you were in a situation that had some of the same kind of emotion triggers, would you think this framework would allow you to better unpack what was happening in real time? If you remembered it, if you used this to unpack and find out what your issues were that were creating the conflicting feelings within you? And don't answer that, but that's a thought to think through that. That's one of the parting questions that I would have for you. Having this framework, could you see that this would give you the ability to really process and unpack what's happening in life and be able to make better decisions on behavior that doesn't add a layer of trauma to your life or to others that you interact with? That's the parting thought to think about. Vinay, go ahead and share yours.
Sure. So mine is a question, which is, to what degree are other people to be forced to an inhuman enslavement or precise understanding of cause and effect in order to reach my long-term goals? So basically, if I'm planning 20 years ahead and my behavior now is carried out relative to those long-term plans, to what degree are other people going to be forced to that same kind of approach because it serves my long-term goals?
Yeah. That's a really deep question to think about.
Yeah.
And so this process is one that, as he began to use this, he said that this has the potential of being something that perpetually heals going forward. What I have found in my personal experience, as I've now been interacting with this for 12 years, this has replaced my first nature of thinking. When situations happen, I immediately, when I begin to feel some kind of way, feeling a little tension, stop mentally. And sometimes I can do it in a split second. What just happened? Something just triggered an emotion. What are you feeling? I'm feeling irritated. What did they just say? That's what they said. It irritated me. Why? What did that conflict? They just told me what to do. Or they just made a statement about someone else. They would only know that if they could read that person's mind. And now I'm irritated because they're trying to tell me something that ain't got nothing to do with what they actually know, and whatever. And then I go through the process. How are you going to choose to respond? Don't do anything that would cause trauma to you.
Or
I
to
learned
others,
set healthy boundaries. Or I say, hold on. I'm not going to entertain that. Let me ask you some questions. Let me channel the data that you're going to give me now and hone that. I try to do the most loving thing in this interaction because the first person I'm responsible for is not traumatizing myself. And if I get annoyed, being annoyed is not a problem. But if I now treat them disrespectfully because I'm rolling my eyes at them, or my tone just changed and they're getting a real salty, nasty, pissy tone that comes with a couple of choice words about them being a fool, I now are running the risk of violating my own values, which actually creates trauma for me. Yes, it traumatizes them, micro trauma, but it actually creates trauma for me. This now has become my framework. It also has given me the tools that when I'm in conflict, any conflict that happens, and now every committee I'm on, they have to learn this, because if we have conflict, we're going to resolve it. If you realize those analyses that you wanted to do at the beginning, are any of those still relevant now? The qualifications, well, he said this because blah, 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 blah. And what I found is very little of that has relevance until you fix this part of the process, because now you can go back and say, is there any of that analysis I was trying to do at the beginning that's relevant for this place of resolution that I'm at? Maybe there is, but you're looking at that data from a very different vantage point.
Got it.
And so what I found is, and I stop people very directly and teach them this process cleanly, do it clean, because after they get to the step 6, for most situations, none of the rest of that information is relevant. I have gotten to a place of revelation, of resolution in myself. I've learned to see my ego triggers. I've gained the ability to communicate them with my words instead of reactive behavior that works just like addiction, my drugs of choice, my ego feeding behavior. I've reeled in doing the things that cause harm to others, so I'm making them better by not causing any additional harm. And when I can begin to do that, my healing, taking my layers off, gives me a greater capacity for dealing with the unhealed parts of others. Because when they do all that and I understand, oh, that's their fears or insecurities showing, and it conflicts with my values, what am I going to do? Set healthy boundaries. And so I treat it just like I do somebody that's on a substance. I love you, but I'm going to set healthy boundaries because you will come and violate the boundaries and the rules and values of my life. And so it's the most loving thing I can do to set boundaries so that you don't infringe and trigger one of them unhealed layers, and I react in a way that I then have traumatized myself. And so this is that piece of what if we could solve this in the evidence-based research with those who had experienced PTSD, terrorism. He was dealing with that level of damage. He began to see a near 100% heal rate. Layer by layer by layer. Whenever you're triggered, that's your curriculum. You work with that thing that triggered you today. You can do a deep dive in the other areas from the past, but you can also work with the today stuff to make sure that that trauma doesn't send roots down. And for me, the magic sauce of this was, if we start our healing, transformative work in society with this, We can now sit and have conversations, and we have a litmus.
So you could
that
do it
gives
for
us
like
language.
large-scale conflict analysis, where the trauma is not individual trauma, but it's collective trauma. Same toolkit applies because collective
Works
trauma,
the
collective
same way,
value.
and you can do the collective and the individual at the same time. I package this and call it healing conversations. When there's a shooting in the community, everyone comes, they do their individual healing while we do the collective healing. You talk about reparations. What if this were how we did reparations? Blacks and whites, because if we go through this, we now have the tools so that we're all speaking the same language. This fits into every value system, because every value system says, getting back to the true identity, stripped down, the unchiseled block, the core of your existence without the layers of damage is the clean mirror, or it's the reflection that's supposed to, that mirror is supposed to reflect divinity in its purest form. The work of doing that is what many faith traditions leave out. So if you're Christian, this is discipleship. If your other faith is still discipleship by whatever vocabulary your faith tradition gives you. If you're no faith tradition, it still works.
Yeah, and it's interesting that it's a language protocol. You know, you teach people a controlled vocabulary. You know, like air traffic controllers, right? They have a controlled vocabulary for the things that you're having in the conversation with the plane, right?
Which conversations actually lead to healing? Healing conversations. These, if you stay in this framework, if you learn this framework and stay in this framework, he said, here's the most efficient route I can give you to get from trauma to a resolution point. And you do it layer by layer, one moment, one incident at a time. Yet you can do groupings of incident, but it's still the least common, one incident at a time. And so it's simple. This process in an hour and a half, we've walked through it with the experience where you've gone through it. The honing, the coaching modality says it's your job to fix yourself. It's goodwill for me to help you. So as a coach, I work with people on honing the facts. I work with them on communicating their values succinctly. Let's get that to a value. No, let's go deeper. Let's get to the core. What's the value? I expect people to tell me the truth. That's the value. That's the value. That's the point. And this person said something that was not factual. It wasn't the truth. And you went sideways. So that part of it, and then holding space so that people feel safe enough to go there, you know, and be honest. Because this forces honesty at your capacity. You can go as shallow. I was mad. Okay, if you were just mad, that's fine. I know you were probably frustrated, disgusted, angry, homicidal, and a whole lot of other things. But if today you can only deal with that surface level, that's fine. When it comes up again, it'll be a little bit better. But the next time you may have to go a little bit deeper and a little bit deeper. So it doesn't require that I have to understand your trauma at all. I don't have to know anything about your trauma at all, which makes it ideal for peer-to-peer kind of work. And the coaching modality says we can put this on the ground. We can spread it organically. If I also package this as social first responders, wherever I am, if I have these tools, I can be of benefit.